The US Federal Reserve government agencies have begun a partial shutdown after lawmakers failed to pass a temporary spending bill before a midnight deadline, threatening the salaries of up to 1 million workers. But what does this mean for emerging economies and South Africa? Well, for more on that, we're joined now by George Glonos, who's the MD and Chief Economist at ETM Analytics, to join us for more. George, thanks so much for your time today. Sure. Just a look at the shutdown that's taken place. It's not the first time that it's occurred. I understand that the last one was in 1996. Your expectations as to when this might end, hopefully?
So there are a lot of dynamics to talk about in this whole thing. So you're quite right, it has happened before. There are two separate issues here that people sometimes confuse. One is the budget. The second is the debt ceiling. So we're talking about the budget now, and the budget's resulted in this partial shutdown. In their experience in the past, and you're referring to the 95 event, in fact the Republicans lost quite a lot of ground in the polls that followed shortly after. And so they'll be very mindful of this, and I think already we're starting to pick up reports on the newswires, on the social media, of infighting within the Republican Party, but specifically the upper echelons of the Republican Party now starting to talk a more conciliatory type of tone and instructing the rest of the Republicans that continuing down this road threatens their majority at next year's elections. So now it starts to become quite interesting, because we're talking about brinkmanship, which is perhaps starting to run its course. And I think that's why the markets aren't really reacting at this point, is that they believe this is not going to be particularly drawn out.
Because essentially what you're saying, infighting within the Republican Party, and the rifts are starting to become clearer if we have read into some of the comments. But what we are having right now is potentially a showdown around Obama's healthcare restructuring laws. And of course, it is ironic that on a day like today, this actually gets implemented, and Obama is talking to Americans today about what these landmark healthcare laws mean. But ultimately, Democrats don't want to negotiate a temporary funding bill that proposes changes to these laws. I mean, what are your thoughts in the terms of the fact that the Republicans have really started to use this as a leverage to attack Obama's new laws?
I think it's opportunistic. I think they're, in a way, almost mercenary, if you like. This bill, the Affordable Healthcare Act, has been promulgated, it's being implemented, money's been spent on it. It's almost as if you're trying to stop a horse after it's bolted. And I think that's the point that the Democrats are making, and quite rightly to that extent, is that if we were going to debate these issues, they should have been debated and sorted out a long time ago. The fact that it's gone to this, the fact that it's gone this far means it's passed several hurdles already, and now to try and stop it like they are trying to stop it right now, I don't think is going to sit particularly comfortably with a number of people, and hence the potential negative fallout for the Republicans if they carry on like this. If they stop it now, they can always hang their hat at the next elections on the notion that, well, it was a bad policy and they did their best to stop it, but they weren't prepared to shut the American economy down. Therefore, they backed off. So they can still come out of this in
the next few days.
In a positive sort of way if they manage it properly. But if they let this drag on as it did for 3 weeks, I think it did in 95 odd, then I think it's a different story. Then it flips around. It's too much of a bad thing can become catastrophic.
And as you mentioned there, that if it does drag on, naturally confidence in the economy will also take a knock. But 800,000 government workers unpaid at the moment, or going to work, or continue going to work and be unpaid for that. If something like that had to happen in an emerging economy like South Africa, I take it wouldn't be great news at all.
No, I don't think it's particularly good news for any economy, including the US economy. But I think we need to, I caution against reading too much into what we've seen so far. Bear in mind, they're not being paid right now, but it doesn't mean to say that the government won't back pay them when things kick off again. So that's the first issue. The second point I'd make is, in fact, through the use of credit cards and debt facilities and all sorts of things, overdrafts, etc., companies and households can probably continue quite comfortably for another 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe even longer, without it having an adverse effect on the economy. But it has to stop soon. I think the bigger problem by far the bigger issue, and one that perturbs me a whole lot more, is the debt ceiling. And we're running out of capacity, or the US is running out of capacity to borrow, and that they're talking about the date of the 17th of October.
I mean,
is potentially catastrophic. That's a lot more serious than what we're going through at the moment.
And potentially, I mean, everyone's saying this could be the curtain raiser to that. I mean, just looking at some of the comments today, certainly some strong words coming through from Citi's global chief economist, Willem Bater, talking about the US being the land of Oz run by munchkins. But he's saying that basically this is going to be an economic catastrophe if the US isn't able to get their act together before the October 17th deadline. I mean, maybe catastrophe is a bit of a big word, but how important is US sovereign debt in the global economy and the whole scheme of things?
In fact, I'd say catastrophe is probably the right sort of word, but there's so much at stake. The stakes are so high in this, which is the reason why I believe they won't let it happen. You're talking about a sovereign default out of choice, which is unheard of. You simply wouldn't do that. And if you consider the US economy almost like the linchpin, it's the cornerstone of global debt markets.
Why? Give us a context as to why.
Because everything basically prices off it. It's a relative value. I mean, if you're talking about a risk-free rate, the one risk-free rate, or supposedly, I don't know if that ever exists anymore, but in market terms, everything benches off the US 10-year and the US Treasury yield curve. And so it has knock-on implications across the globe. So if if you're talking about disruptions, interest rates spiking in the US and interest rates in the rest of the world spiking as a result of that can be catastrophic. Remember that a number of governments around the world are sitting with debt piles significantly larger than they were 5 years ago as a result of the crisis and laxed fiscal discipline that we've seen over the past decade. All of that now starts coming back into focus because it's unsustainable, and it's that unsustainability that gets exposed when interest rates rise to the degree that could happen on a US default. So, I mean, it would make the 2008 look like a walk in the park, to be quite frank. I mean, it's that big. Which is why I believe we won't get there. Interestingly, because it's just simply the stakes are too high.